Okay, we're back again here at allpointstv.com, and you're not going to believe the program that we have today. Well, maybe maybe you will believe it after this over and say, well, why did I spend the time? But we think we're going to do some things here that will prick your interest. And I'm always about the business of trying to bring up the rear, so to speak. And I would love to talk about the very beginning points of the nation. This is when the country's at its best. And I don't think we can go back there, and I don't think you can duplicate anything they did. And I don't think you have anybody that can actually fulfill the roles that were played at the founding points of this nation. There were some great people back there in that time period. And I know exactly what Ayn Rand meant when she said that the ones that put the Constitution together were the first, and so far, and she died in 1982, Ayn Rand, and she said, and so far, our last intellectuals. And then all these years later, from 1982 to 2024, I don't see any I don't see any reason to change what she said.
Well, I'd like to say this. Our founders were intellectuals, but
Yeah,
they weren't
they
like
were.
the current batch, what they label as intellectuals. They actually had a very strong understanding, a practical understanding of reality.
They did.
And whereas the ones we got on our campuses now, the intellectual, the alleged ones, they're totally devoted. Basically, their whole entire existence is very parasitic. They depend upon ready available cash to them through governments and stuff like that. So they hardly are going to be critical of those things.
Yeah, and John, none of them had any degrees, and that's the thing that is riveting in terms of the intellectual prowess that they brought to what turned into a convention in Philadelphia in 1787. These were not well. When I say credentialed, I mean they're not institutionally credentialed. They were credentialed in terms of they having attacked the body of information, had a grounding point that they took to that convention. See, don't forget here. Let's see, was that Stephen Birmingham's book called? What's the writer that wrote? No, that was. It'll come to me in a minute. The Best and the Brightest. I don't know why that name escapes me. The author of that book, but that book is talking about the best and the brightest. But the best and the brightest today. What are we talking about today compared to the best? The best and the brightest back at that time period compared to the best and brightest today, there's no comparison. You know, you can take the ones. I don't even think you can say Harvard at the top of anything right now, because look what happened over there with this president they had, and then there's some other plagiarists they had underneath her, and we're now finding out a lot of the mystique of the university left the building a long time ago. There's been riding on the name from the time that the institution was really at the top of its game, but none of them are at the top of the game today. They all have fallen way down from where they were when I was coming up. They used to have a quiz bowl, and you really had some scholars on these. We were not talking about football and basketball. We were talking about the academic aspects. And the universities were known for their academic programs, and you made your selection based upon that. You know what they make it basing it on today? They're basing the selection of what colleges they go to today by who won a national championship in football and basketball, and that's why they pay those coaches so much, because those football and basketball teams attract the students to the campus because they're in the limelight, and you know all the players go there. They don't go to class. They go there to play on these teams, hoping to get a contract from the major sports. In the NBA, that'd be the basketball part, and the NFL would be the football, and then they're not going there too much to play hockey. But that was not always the case. But even when it was back in that time period, I'm talking about at the turn of the 20th century, when you had some heavyweights there, no question about it. But I don't think even those persons could have weathered the storm they would run into in that room when there would be 55 delegates that would eventually meet it not necessarily all at one time, but there would eventually be 55 members that went there as delegates to what turned into the Constitutional Convention. And what they came up with, creating it out of whole cloth and bringing a certain amount of intellectual prowess to the table from their own vantage point and their own readings without these degrees. And they had attacked the body of information. Really, the degrees, to me, should be an indication of your scholarship. You think that, do you think, let me ask you a question here. Do you think these degrees today are testimony to the scholarship of these people out here? I'm talking about these persons on TV, some of these scholars, I call them, they're not going to like me too much, but I've gotten way past that. I've been calling them out, these TV scholars. You think these television scholars today could pass the muster in that room where they have these PhDs, and we can all have these degrees now. Don't get me wrong about that. You had to earn them. When I was going to these colleges I went to all the major colleges here in Michigan. And when I graduated from Eastern, I'll be honest with you, I thought you had to work, and I think you did have to work a lot harder for those degrees than you have to work for now. Seems like what they're doing now, and I haven't been back in a long time, but it seems to me that what you're doing now is paying the money. And if you stay there long enough and you don't quit and give up and throw your hands up in the air in despair, what will happen is that they will eventually credential you. But the question I raised, given my looking at and listening to the ones they put on TV, I have to raise the question, what kind of requirements that they have that allow that level of scholarship to be credentialed? Because it took me a long time to kind of understand what was going on here. I thought, because I had a lot of shocks in the way to my degrees, but I have to tell you that I was shocked even in undergrad school. Before I got my first degree, I was surprised in undergraduate school. The first test that I took, and I never forget it. It was I think the class it was in the auditorium of the school. This was the freshman class was always the largest class. They fall off as you go up the ladder towards your degree. But the first test I took, there were 100 students in the class, and you sat in that auditorium. It was a very, very big place, and you sat every other seat. And then the ones in front of you, they were sitting every one other seat. But so it's no like being able to look over their shoulder, because they were not sitting right in front of you. They were sitting over a seat, from you. In front of you, they're sitting over a seat from you as well. And my first shock was we doing a test in here, and I stayed up all night. I got my eyes were bloodshot, and I'm sitting in this room, and the instructor was in the front of the room giving out the exam, and then he was in front of the class explaining what we were to do and how much time we had, and all of that. Everybody's quiet and nervous. This is my first college test. And he walked to the back of the room at some point, just to change where his location in the room. And when he walked to the back of the classroom, I kept hearing this sound of pow, 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 like books were closing. And I'm dumb. I'm from this small neighborhood in Birmingham. I don't know anything. All I know is what I know, the book information. I'm not too coherent culturally in what's going on, because my neighborhood was kind of shut off from everything. And but I've had this idea of the college is way up here. It was certainly way up here in my neighborhood, because I was the first one in the neighborhood to break out of there and go to college. Certainly away from home. And I went from Birmingham to Knoxville. And I heard what sounded like books closing, but I said to myself, it couldn't be that. This is the university level now, and they're not doing what they did in high school when they were cheating all the time. I just knew they weren't cheating in college, and I'm staying up all night. I'm making sure I'm ready for the first test. It was a big deal for me, and I'm hearing what sounded like books closing. But I said no, it couldn't. I said to myself, couldn't be. They're not cheating at the college level. So he walked to the front of the room, back to where he was standing. And then I heard the sound in the back of the room, the same sound I heard from the front when he vacated that space and went to the back of the room. When he walked back to the front, I heard the same thing in the back of me. So I raised my head up because I cannot be mistaken now because it's clear. Both ears had to be bad for me not to hear those books, blooming in closing. So I leaned over. There was a guy sitting next to me, sitting next one seat over from me, but then the guy sitting next to me one seat over. I will never forget it. There's a guy named Reverend Whitney. And I leaned over. I guess I must have found like 12 sides of a fool to ask him. I said to him, I was very whimsical about it. I said, are they cheating in here? And he looked at me like I was from the Stone Age. He said, cheating? Are they cheating here? Aren't you cheating? He asked me if I was cheating. I might have been the only one in that classroom didn't have my book open at some point during that test. But that surprised me. I was just flabbergasted because to me, that level was way up here from where I was and the poverty I was living in. And I wrote an article about that a couple of days ago, and it was amazing the feedback I got. A lot of persons were able to relate to the cultural ignorance that I admitted to in a number of different areas, traveling abroad and things like that. And I just had to learn so much more. I was not only having to learn that which was necessary to get the degree, I had to learn I had to obtain a new cultural understanding everywhere I went because my experience was so limited. And you only know that through traveling. And I've gotten a lot of things outside the country as well, along that line as well. But it stunned me. But my point I'm trying to make here is that I don't think even at the time period when the universities were more on their game, let's put it that way, that they were more on their game. Not that would have been quantitatively higher than what you read and what in terms of Jefferson, for example. You see, these are learned people, and at that convention, they sent their best and their brightest. And so everybody that was at that convention, all 55 of those persons that showed up, they were the best that this country had to offer in those 13 states. They were sending them there to correct a document that all had agreed after 1986, after the Shays Rebellion in Massachusetts. All of them agreed that something had to be done now. They've been putting it off. They knew that something, they knew that it wasn't doing what it intended to do. They were fundamentally trying to change government, to chain, CHAIN, chain government down. That was the total focus. You can make a lot of mistakes when you have a single focus in mind. I give you an example of that last night. I was listening to a program, and they said that the ones that have the highest vote total in the country as a block, they're not the Jews, they're not the blacks, they are single women. And single women who have a high vote total, and they are single issue oriented, and that's the abortion issue.
That's like, it's such a stellar thing. I mean, it's like, that Andrew Tate, the guy who was like arrested and stuff. He said something. I mean, the guy is like kind of a jerk. I don't agree with. He's got some recognition, some spots where he actually has some clarity. And he goes, the left is basically fetishized abortion, and it's like they made it. I mean, they make that the standard of freedom. And it's like, well, okay,
Right.
you have a freedom to be as promiscuous as you choose to, but you don't have the right to take another human life. And that's what seems to be lacking on this. They say, you can't tell me what I'm doing with my body. Well, AIDS can be really argued. That's another body. So, and another thing is too, everything else, okay, and other things, leftists are not consistent. They don't care about something you find in a pond, a temporary pond on somebody's farm and wants to stop you from developing it. That's because that's a life. But they don't want to say they're so reluctant and so intellectually dishonest to not to just admit a human embryo developing inside the feet, inside the womb is a life, a human life. What the hell else is going to become? A frog or whatever? I mean, it's ridiculous. There's the lack of consistency in these people's lives.
Yeah, John, you're making a point. That is this discussion we're having right now. We don't realize it because we don't understand the founding documents of the country. But if you go back to the Declaration of Independence, you'll see there where Jefferson, who had no degree but was a scholar in his own right, wrote in the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights you cannot take from them, and governments and rights that government has not bestowed upon them. They are inalienable rights. They are natural rights that you're born with because of you're a human being. And those rights cannot be abrogated by government. Constitutionally, it cannot be done, but certainly by the legalisms of government. That is, say they can do it because they have the right to the single right to initiate force. Government retains that for itself, does not lend it out to any other institutional fabric that may be created in the country. But beside that point, but looking at the constitutionality of it and also looking at natural rights, government does not have the right to eliminate life without cause and without due process. And there is no due process in abortion. I'm just telling you the truth. The documents are being violated and we don't even recognize it because we don't know what our documents require of us. We want to just kind of do what we want, and then whatever materially develops from it, then we want to get rid of the result of the behavior that we can alter and not have to go to that extreme. But you see, this is the problem that we have today, that we do not want to change behavior. We don't want to live with the consequence of the behavior. See, people think that choice is the decision you make at the clinic. Choice that's the consequence of the choice. You made a choice already before it gets to that point.
You know, there's this philosophy book I have. It's one of the better known ones for a handbook of encyclopedias of philosophy. Well, the man who compiled it, the editor, actually had his own name in there and what his schools of thought was and stuff like that he was connected to. And he was a non-consequentialist, and he was advocating non-consequentialism. And I went, okay, so you're denying reality. I mean, people shouldn't be held accountable for the consequence of their actions. And again, I looked it up in his own book, and that's what basically it means. So it's like ridiculous.
Yeah, it is.
How can everything has a reaction? I mean, or an outcome. Like, how can you deny that?
Right, John. It's interesting where people feel that this Ayn Rand makes a very good point in the book called For the New Intellectuals. I think that might have been one of the books she wrote at the very end of her life. And what she is arguing there, and she argues it also in her overall objectivist philosophy, is that you can refute reality. You can deny it, but you cannot deny the consequences of denying reality. That is to say, her argument, and it's a very profound argument, is that your lack of perception of reality does not change the fact that reality does exist. And if you deny it, you cannot avoid the consequences of that. So this idea that you can do anything you want to and you have something that results from it. You can simply run to the clinic and do something in that. But you see, the nature has a punishment for that, and the punishment is the moral standards of your society go down, the safety of the people go down, because if you can do that to an innocent child that's developing and has no defense of his own to ward off the termination of his life, and you choose that path to go down, then no sanctity of life. That's how it works.
Yeah, you okay. Well, when you already advocate for removing the lives of those which are inconvenient, that of the unborn child, then it's more than a slippery slope to saying, well, these older people, there's going to be a drain in society anyway. We don't have the resources, so yeah, we'll just euthanize them. I mean, it's like, at what point are we going to have say, we're going to probably suffer consequences for adopting this approach, this mentality, this outlook, this philosophical outlook. Yeah, and Ayn Rand would also say too that all conflicts arise from conflict in values. That's what it is. I mean, when people say, well, what about wars? Well, duh, that's definitely a conflict in values. Anything else you're looking at, social movements, need for people to think they have to assert their civil rights to get their civil rights means you've been left out of the current process. So that itself is a conflict of values arising from all conflict does arise from a conflict in values. She nailed it,
Yeah, John, that the point you're making is very, very important. If people think there are not consequences for violations of nature's laws, if you put, for example, you start building these institutions, and you put the old folks, the most seasoned, the most learned, the most experienced people in the community over to the side somewhere, separating them from the community, and put them over here and cast them aside, the children coming up, particularly when the parents are working, and now you got both parents working out of the household, and the older people, the ones who are the grandparents, who would be the guides while the parents are working, the grandparents are there, being another the extended family. What's that word for it?
There's a nuclear family.
The nuclear family. Yeah. The nuclear family. You are paying a price for it, because look at what has happened to the country. You see, you can think there are no consequences of you denying a natural phenomenon, but the consequences are built into the denial, and you won't be able to avoid the consequences of the denial. Rand made that very clear. I think that's one of the main points that she makes, that reality does not depend upon your perception of it. It punishes you, though, if you're in violation of the perception of it. You cannot avoid the consequences of the denial.
Oh, like Motormouth Ben Shapiro would say, because there's some things I agree with the man. Sometimes I think he's like, for one thing, I think a question why he's considered such a valid pundit, because basically he never actually did anything on his own that wasn't handed to him. But okay, we'll go on that later. But he does say, facts don't care about your feelings. And exactly right. There are moral realities. In fact, factual realities that stem from moral choices. And that's all. That's what the crucial part of human existence is the consequences arising from human actions or human values. And this with Nietzsche would actually say there's no basically said basically there's no moral phenomenon. There's only moral interpretation of phenomena. Before him, La Rochefoucauld said there's nothing that's wrong, right or wrong, but thinking makes it so. It's basically they're talking, and then Nietzsche would talk about putting on labels. This is good, this is bad, this is good, or this is good evil, and that goes into another tangent. But basically, the reality is our actions have consequences, and that's what the politicians try to find a way is get somebody else to have to pick up the slack for somebody else's lack of recognition of that fact. Yeah.
John, I think that what you said there, if they could understand that, we would have, just based on that phenomenon that you were describing, a much better society. But we would never be a moral society until we began to go back to these moral premises that nature has put in front of us. You can deny them, but there's a consequence for the denial. And this country would never be a moral country as long as it is allowing an institutionalization of the murder of its children. I'm sorry, you will never have a moral society.
I don't know if you ever listened to like pop music.
It's impossible.
A song came out in the 80s sometime. It's called Southern Cross, but it's by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And it goes, when you see the Southern Cross, it's a constellation you see when you're sailing. And the song's about sailing. But it's like you see the Southern Cross in the Southern Hemisphere when you're in the other hemisphere. And he said, but he said, do you see why you see this way? You see the Southern Cross for the first time. You understand why I feel this way? Because the truth that you might be running from is so small, but it's as big as the promise of the coming day. And ironically, David Crosby is the one that helped write the song, and he was a very liberal person morally about everything. But he had that recognition of reality. There's in the real reality, there is an unfolding and a manifestation of the consequence of actions.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things that we need to start thinking about, and it's amazing how much we suspended our morality. Really, if you're working on emotion and passion, then you have suspended to the extent that you're employing those tools, you're suspending reason. And if you're not reasoning, then the passion and the emotionalism that is the product. It looks like that's reasoning, but it's not reasoning. It's being driven by your whims, and that's never going to be the best judgment you can make. Well, you're just shooting from the hip and making decisions based upon how you feel about something, because the person that is thinking about it is not thinking about the action itself, but also thinking about the consequences that will follow the action. I read a story some time ago about two persons were at a drive-in for at a hamburger place, and the person in front of him was taking more time than he should at the window. The guy gets out of his car, the one's in back gets out of his car, goes up to the window, the guy is in front, and was confronting him about the time that he took, and they got into an argument, and the guy in the front passed some words to him that the guy in the back didn't like. The guy goes back to his car, gets his gun, come back up to the front. The guy's still sitting in the seat. The guy comes up behind him and fires on him. Now this person is dead, and the person that shot him didn't go there to shoot anybody, but the guy shot him. He's in jail for whatever number of years they gave him for cold-bloodedly shooting somebody. But the point is that if you're unthinking, you're unreasoning in that, and impulsive. You're operating upon how you feel about something. And a lot of persons have gotten confused, thinking that feelings is thinking. Johnny has gotten confused in school, thinking because he feels something that's thinking in terms of that. Johnny doesn't know how to think, and really, Johnny doesn't even know how to interact with people, because they out here, they're in their homes or outside somewhere, and they're sitting down and they flicking that screen up and down and so on and so forth, and not learning how to interact. Put the cell phone down and go out and play, and then something comes up and you didn't intend for it to come up, but something came up, got to be rectified. You got to now bring some thinking to the scene to resolve the problem. And you can't do it because it's something very strange. How do you resolve it without coming to blows and not interacting? It's a phenomenon that you don't face. Machines are not going to create an interactiveness with you that's going to cause a conflict. It'll be something you might come on the screen, you get to resolve in that, but that's not going to bring out any. You may throw the machine down, throw the phone down because you're frustrated with something that comes up, but you're not going to hit. You're not going to hit anybody. But that's the consequence that nature employs when you violate the natural Gerald Mass's natural genesis. Here's a book out, 2-volume work called Natural Genesis. You can violate the natural genesis, but in the violation of that, there is not going to be a release of you from the fallout that will occur. That nobody escapes it. And so we're living in I think we're living in a very false society right now in America. And I wrote an article, I think a couple of days ago. I was talking about how this country is one of the this country is off kilter, and we're living in one of the most insane countries in the world right now. Certainly based on the standards of the country in the past. The framers that would come here today would be horrified about what this country has been turned into, which is totally different than what was the assignment they placed in the lap of the country after they left the convention in Philadelphia on September the 17th, 1787. Excuse me, when they left the that meeting that had started on, according to their dates, May the 25th of that year, and they adjourned on the 17th of September. When they went back home, they had done some work to put in what they considered would have to be placed in front of a nation that was morally healthy. I think it was Madison that said, I think it was Madison. I don't think that it would have been Hamilton would have said this, but one of them, I think Hamilton was probably a different voice at the convention than this, but this is what James Madison said, that which was in fact founded, or it could have been Benjamin Franklin said, well, that which is founded, we found it here, is really made for a moral people. And if you have people that are morally grounded, then these restrictions will be accepted and cultivated and worked upon and built upon to create a moral society. Maybe not a beloved society, but one that where the rule of law is always applicable in citizens, where you have the equal application of the law, was the intention of the frames. They left there with that idea in mind. And boy, we've fallen away from that. And I think the failure of it, quite frankly, was in the first generation of the country's history. I think we had 20 years of grace from 1776 to 1796. That's my dating of it. I'd love to see what those scholars say about it, but I think we began to go off the rails after that first generation had passed. And so that 20-year period was the country at its best. And then we began to see a falling away as we got further and further away from the tenets of the framers. They had a certain intent. And I'm talking about the original intent, and I don't see any evidence of it now where the original intent is playing out. And I have contended here, and I argued this when I was working on my PhD. I was arguing that the original intent of the document has been violated by some of the things put in the document. I still make that argument now. I'm probably the only one in the country that argues that there are certain things in the Constitution that, even though placed in the document, are unconstitutional. See, people don't want to make that argument that the document could be flawed, because if it doesn't do that which was originally intended for the document to do, then wouldn't that make it the document then is unconstitutional? Because a document can, and I argued this at that time. They never heard an argument like that before. But I was arguing that you cannot use a document to cancel itself out. You cannot amend the document so that the amendment of the document cancels the document, the intent of the document. They thought I lost. This was something very different for there. But isn't that true, that you cannot, if you amend something, the amendment is to, in fact, take care of some things that were not in the purview when the document was in fact created. There's some things that came up you could not possibly have seen because it's something very new in the future, and you allow it to be amended so that it can accommodate the new circumstances that may be presented to the country at a different point in time, because times change and certain conditions change, and now you didn't have this foresight to see this coming, and if it's not rectified, it's a train wreck and so on and so forth. But I will tell you that in Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, there's a violation there in terms of them now trying to use the third section of Amendment 14, where they're trying to apply that they can tell people they cannot run for office because of some debilitating circumstance they claim existed prior to, and they can say they're trying to use this against Trump. You're involved in this here. You've not been convicted of it, but you're involved in this, and therefore we can cancel out your right to run and people to vote for you. Then what does that do to Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution? The original document said that the government shall guarantee, federal government, central government should guarantee to each state a Republican form of government. And that means that the people in those states will be able to choose their elected officials. If you cannot do that, you don't have a Republican form of government. Isn't that true? You have to be able to choose your own representatives because it's in their voice that they're supposed to speak. If you cancel out the right to even put them there, how are they speaking for you when you weren't allowed to put them there in the first place?
Basically, it's like a gradual process of inching away, pulling away the control of the government from the people, and it's incrementally done. I mean, we've allowed so much. I mean, the tax, the income tax being added to it. A certain number of states didn't really ratify it. It was allowed, and they also give the permission to actually enact any means possible to the needs to enforce it. They're able to put that in there, and basically, and the thing is, I used to fantasize about having like a new constitutional convention, and I thought that'd been a great idea. But I saw the decay of the civics classes and stuff like that, the eradication of them, and I said, "Oh my God, well, we can imagine what's going to happen if we let these people now come up." I mean, you'd have like the feelings police, and you'd have like which we're already having, and the thing is, law enforcement's willing to go along with this because it's the law. It's like nobody calls foul on. I mean, basically they're automatons. You wind them up, you set them against people. So I mean, this is a horrifying position.
Yeah, that would be frightening today because you have so much chaos in the country right now, and if you open up this document to today's people, the citizens sitting down today trying to amend this document and then bring their best to the table, the best and the brightest, you don't get the results you think you're going to get.
When you got somebody in the college campuses who identifies with being a Furby and dresses like some fuzzy animal, yeah, I want them to write the laws my life is going to be ruled by. Yeah, I'm joking. I really don't want them anywhere near writing my laws, Yeah,
John, it would be a disaster because the people that would come now to rectify the document would put in things that they like rather than things that will in fact make the country better. If that were not the case, why do we have so much opposition to a candidate that's saying that he wants to make the country great again? And look at how much fighting you have to do. I was saying this to a person last night, that it's very interesting that the MAGA movement has to fight the people whose country they're trying to save in their behalf, and they'll have to fight them to do so. We're living in a time period where the things that we knew, that we know now, the earth is not flat. The seasons are regulated by nature. You don't cause warming. The sun does that. You don't have the firepower. Listen to that. I have to get my subject, but listen to this representative from Texas, Barbara. I think Jordan Lee. I think her name is, and she was talking about the moon is made. At least she got past. It's not made out of cheese. She's saying the moon is made out of gases, and that you can't get too near The sun. Well, hello. The sun is 27,000 degrees Fahrenheit. You're sweating 93 million miles away from it, and this woman is saying this stupid stuff, which came from behind the mask to show what we have in the intellectual prowess of those who are leading the nation. Nobody would make a statement like that. And then this guy named Hank Johnson that took over from Cynthia McKinney, Hank Johnson down there in Georgia, show you something about that state. He thought that if you put enough Marines on this one island, I think he's talking about the island of Guam, if you put too many Marines there, the island would sink. He actually believed that. These are people that are running the country now and making these kinds of stupid comments. Barbara Lee Jackson over there, Barbara Lee, who is the representative in California, was running for the seat that was vacated by the death of Dianne Feinstein. And she was advocating for a $50 an hour minimum wage. Yeah, thanks a lot. You'd be eating a hamburger that costs $75 for a hamburger. If they put in the lettuce in there, it's $80. As if you can just simply pull a number out of a hat and then assign that to the minimum wage, and then everything is well. This is insanity. That you don't want to have a convention today.
It's just like
not with that.
Well, this economist that over at U of M, Flint, of course he's echoing stuff that's really considered wisdom, economic facts. That the laws of economics are just like any other law of reality. And you have this is going to be the reaction. What is going to, and I see all these, especially Democrats, they always want to say, well, we're going to mandate these people pay you more. Well, so it's unfunded mandate, because guess what? They don't know the operating costs, because guess what? Most of these people, the only thing they did well enough in their life is to lie enough to get people to vote for them. That's it. Even McGovern, that bag of crap, what you brought that before, when he left office, he realized he was going into the business world. Those legislation I passed is when I was still a senator or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was detrimental to business. Did Georgie? McGovern was a piece of crap.
Yeah,
I knew that as a kid.
Yeah, John, he didn't know. He went into business after he left the political arena. He didn't know when he was a senator. I'm talking about George McGovern. He didn't know when he was a senator what he found out when he tried to set up a business, which he never set up prior to. After he was defeated, then of course that would be something he had to look into. What are you going to do next? But when he was a senator, he was passing all kinds of nonsense, voting for it. He said when ran business, he said, I didn't have the faintest idea. Well, that's most of them. Donald Trump experience is very different from the experience. What does Letitia James know about anything? I mean, anything. And what does Fanu, she wants to call it Fani. I'm from the South. I know Fani. No parent in the South would be having a French pronunciation of that word. That's Fanny. Sometimes there was Fannie Mae, Fannie Lou Hamer, for example, the great activist in Mississippi, the sharecropper that came off there and asked for the right to vote and led the voting movement down there in the 60s. Fannie Lou Hamer, she never said Fannie, and that name was not given to her because of Fannie. Those parents in the South would never thought about Fannie, as if the word is a French pronunciation of the term. But what Fannie Willis supposedly has a bank account of $6 million, and there's a report that Letitia James in her bank account has $15 million. And if any of that is remotely in the ballpark, how much money they have, that spells George Soros all over the place, because you're not making that on $100,000 a year and putting $6 million in the bank.
Oh, okay, I'll tell you. I'll be satisfied if they reveal their investing group, because I would really love to put a few.
Wouldn't that be interesting?
Yeah, but they wouldn't do that anyway, because they don't want to see. Another thing is all these people, rich people are making they're like all their gravy off of your backs. What do you guys do? You're parasites.
Yeah,
you politicians don't create anything anybody desires.
John, parasites is the right word for them. Why is nobody interested in that question of where are these persons getting all this money from? Who's funding this? Who's funding our downfall? That's what it really amounts to. Because if you don't have the rule of law, everything has been lost. If you're a single voter, single issue voter, that's a downfall. Because if you say, for example, your whole interest in voting is someone that will in fact trigger laws that would maintain your right to abortion, and you want to abrogate the right to the sanctity of life, let's say you do that. If you're not worried about the country, you're not worried about the borders being violated, you're not worried about the invasion of the country through these illegal aliens, won't even call them that, you want to call them undocumented workers. If you're not concerned about that, if you don't have a country, all the rest of that goes down the drain with it. So this idea you're going to be worried about that and then not the health of the country, that's a formula for the demise of everything. That is your issue and every other issue, because you got to have a country for those interests to stay, those issues to stand. And if the country that exists, none of that exists either. But we're heading toward. We're already at the cliff. The question is, are we going to push the rest of the country over the cliff? We're already at the cliff in this country. So many different things that are giving us pause, should have given us pause. I mean, almost everything we're doing should give us pause. Grandparents isolated from the community. Everything's going on. You would think that we would have looked at it and say, well, this is not working. Look at the budgetary issue. The fact that we got a $34 trillion, which I always try to break it down so they can see it in more stock, terms, $34,000 billion. 34 trillion is $34,000 billion. Each trillion is 1,000 billion. If you got 34 trillion, $34,000 billion of debt. You would have thought at some point when they got to the first million, I remember when they first got to the first million, and people were saying, wow, if you stack the dollar bills up, you could go, and it was how high it would go with $1 billion. And everybody was $1 trillion. Everybody was so amazed at what that would look like. Well, we didn't stop at that point. We looked at it in horror, but we kept on spending, creating dollars, throwing more dollars out there. And now we have, and this is what they admit to, is not the whole debt, because we got a lot of liabilities out there, unfunded liabilities, and that's debt also. And how much debt do we have personally in the country? There's $2 trillion of debt we're carrying with these credit cards. So you would think at some point we would have paused, because everything is going out of control, and you would have said, well, we need to come back a little bit from the brink. We're not pulling back. We're going full steam ahead. Damn the torpedoes, Farragut. So we are heading towards something that we didn't plan for, but you cannot deny that would be the extent of the consequence. Just because you don't want to face it does not mean you're going to be able to stop it. This train has already left the station. And I'm sorry to report this, unless there's some pullback. And I'm now thinking maybe it's a little late today for that. Maybe that train cannot be slowed down. Maybe it's picked up a life of its own and is operating at an accelerating rate. In fact, I know that to be true, because I do know what's happening when you have debt sitting at that magnitude, at that level, with debt sitting there, having already done the work that it can do, but sitting there and is not doing anything for the development of the country. What it's doing now is draining the resources of the country, because debt sitting there is creating more debt just by its existence. And there's no way to get off this train, because if you repudiate the debt, then your international standing falls, and everything then is avoided, because you're no longer able to attract capital, because you are a capital risk. So the $34 trillion on the one hand cannot be paid off, and it cannot be extended to the future forever because the future will eventually get here. We're in some. King said we have got some difficult days ahead. Well, we got some very difficult days ahead right now, and that is not going to get any better. Let me tell you what I came here to the studio to talk about today. I wanted to read to you something from the best. Well, I can't say the best. One of the most voluminous volumes on the great George Washington. And I wanted to read this because I wanted to ask at the end of the reading, which of the presidents you think do you put up there knowing what Ron Chernoff wrote about in this book that is titled Washington, A Life. This is it. This is the book here. And I wanted to read, I really came to read quite extensively about it, but I'll just read some parts of it. But I want to ask you, John, what time we have now into the program? 50 minutes. Okay, I'm just read maybe 5 to 10 minutes of it. But I wanted to ask you after the reading, given what Ron Chernoff is writing about, what person would you put on the plateau with George Washington? What president of the 46 presidents we've had, Grover Cleveland, of course, being counted twice, the 22nd and 24th president, 1884 and 1892, with Benjamin Harrison in between the two terms, with him coming back like Trump is trying to come back this year in non-consecutive terms. If he does that, then he'd be the second president to have pulled that off. It's very hard to come back after you have stood down. John Quincy Adams had been elected in 1824 when he was defeated by Andrew Jackson in 1828. He then went into the House of Representatives and was a representative. Didn't come back to the president. Donald Trump was trying to come back, not from an elective office, trying to come back from having been defeated. At least the requirement, the call was he was defeated, and he's now trying to come back to become president again. If he does that, then that has never been done. That is something that well, maybe Cleveland did do it in terms of because in 1888 he didn't run for another office. Ran back. He came back to president in 92. But the first one in which the president was in fact won the election by the popular vote, but was denied the right to seat because of the shenanigans that went on at the next level, where the electoral votes were in fact manipulated, and John Quincy Adams left Washington almost in the same storm, in a way, as his father, John Adams, who was set upon by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, and what really was a nonviolent coup in a way against the Adams administration. Okay, but anyway, here's a little bit of what Ron Chernoff writes about the great George Washington, and you tell me who stands up there, who on Mount Rushmore in South Dakota can stand on that wall with George Washington, given what this man did. Chernoff, this is the 34th chapter of the book. This is George Washington almost at the end of the fighting for the revolutionary independence of the nation. Chernoff says, afraid that his army might relax its guard prematurely, he kept drilling troops on the parade ground, demanding that his men look sharp, and barked out a steady stream of instructions. The commander-in-chief recommends to the officers to pay particular attention to the carriage of their men, either upon parade or marching. Nothing contributes so much to the appearance of a soldier or so plainly indicates discipline as an erect carriage, firm step, and steady countenance. He indicated in his displeasure that soldiers didn't step boldly and freely, but short and with bent knees. Not only did he want his men to look bright and snappy, but he wanted them housed in style, insisting that regularly convenience and even some degree of elegance should be attended to in the construction of their huts. He's doing this even in the fact that the war was in abatement at this point. Now, at a certain point, what's going to happen here is that the soldiers are going to be almost be in revolt because they were not getting paid. And this posed another problem among a myriad of other problems that Washington was in fact facing. And Washington has to almost counter what was really a revolt in his army because they're out there fighting. And the people that were running the government were not, giving enough in terms of paying people. We have that problem now. I get calls all the time. Paralyzed Veterans of America, different groups, military groups that are calling because they want you to make up the difference. I always contribute to it. I understand these persons sacrifice a lot in terms of giving what they gave to the nation. So I feel some forbearance here that I ought to try to do something. May not be able to do a lot given all the number of persons that call me. But I can do something, and I would say I can give. They'll start out with $75, and I'll say, "Well, look, I can't do 75. Somebody just called me a few minutes ago. I can do 25." But I never say no. Well, here's what Washington faced. This is the revolt that's taking place by the military. Where Washington's going to say that the military being in some comeuppance and wielding that kind of power, this could be very dangerous. And he's going to say here that a military is nothing to play with. The danger of it, the military rising up, and they were going to march into New York, march into Philadelphia, and take what they felt was their rightful due. Here's a meeting they called, and here's how Washington responded to it. They're going to call a meeting. This is almost like a mutiny that's taking place at this point. And they're going to call a meeting where they're going to meet, and they're going to decide what they're going to do about it. They're not getting paid. And the idea is they're going to march in there and take the money they felt that they deserve. They deserve to get paid. Given the sacrifice they made, these fat guys, these fat cats, getting 3 squares a day, and they're out there doing the fighting and frostbitten and all the rest of it. Washington heard about the meeting, and then Washington did this. Washington banned the outlaw meeting. In announcing the measure, he subtly tried to shame the officers by saying that their good sense would lead them to, quote, pay very little attention to such an irregular invitation. Instead of negating their grievances, he tried to champion and divert them into orderly channels and called his own meeting at noon on March 15th. Suspicious of how quickly events had moved, Washington voiced his fears to Hamilton the next day. A nameless gentleman, Colonel Walter Stewart, had come to the Newburgh camp, he said, and told the officers that public creditors would support their mutiny as a way to guarantee repayment of their loans. Stewart further suggested that certain congressmen supported the mutiny as a way of prodding delinquent states into paying promised taxes to the central government. There is no overt sense in the letter of Washington accusing Hamilton of orchestrating the plot. He didn't blame Hamilton for it. Hamilton was a messenger saying that this is what they're saying out here General Washington behind your back. Rather, he exhorted him to take timely action to redress the officers' complaints, contending that many were so short of funds that they might be clapped into debtor's prison upon release from the army. The failure to take appropriate measures, Washington forewarned, would plunge the country into, quote, a gulf of civil horror from which there might be no receding. In calling his meeting, Washington waited a few days to allow cooler heads to prevail. For his venue, he chose the same place as that proposed for the subversive gathering, a new building nicknamed the Temple of Virtue. A cavernous, John, you would give me a 1 minute? Okay. A cavernous wooden structure completed a month earlier for Sunday services, dances, and Masonic meetings. Well, anyway, the bottom line of that meeting is that Washington stood there and reminded them that they had fought with valor, that all of the suffering they had gone through, he was right there by their side. When he slept outside, as the commanding officer, Washington slept outside with them. And he really broke their heart when he pulled out his glasses. They had never seen Washington with glasses before. And Washington pulled out his glasses to read from his text. And they were kind of surprised that they had never seen him wear glasses before. He had never read to them before. And Washington said that he had grown old and almost blind in his service to his country, and so on and so forth. And by the time Washington finished his talk, the people there were made to think about what it was they were doing. If he had not been the leader that he was, and I say he stands alone of all the presidents we've had, this experiment could have gone down right there. The military could have risen up and resurrected what they were fighting against in that 7-year war from 1776 to 1783 when they signed the Treaty of Paris. And Washington stood there and went into their patriotism and called them back to their patriotic duty. And in that, we have that passed down to us, calling us to our patriotic duty today. We are called to be patriots. That's the calling. And we'll see how we do with it, because we got a few shots left to get this done. And November the 5th is going to be critical. That's our last shot. And if we get it wrong, November the 5th of this year, I don't think this country can continue to stand as even an intended republic in Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution. You've got to think about George Washington, and I suggest you go and read about this experience, because that experience could come down in calamity if we don't get it right, almost right now. Okay, we got to get out of here. We'll see you again next week, and I want you to always follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.